even when you have something to hide. The whole point is that's the moment when you need to dig deep and say, you know what, we've got to be transparent here, even though they're not going to be happy to hear this.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Jimmy Wales. Jimmy is the co-founder of Wikipedia and the co-founder of the Wikimedia Foundation, the nonprofit behind the world's largest free knowledge resource. Since launching Wikipedia in 2001, with the defined purpose to build a free encyclopedia for every person on the planet in their own language, Jimmy has helped guide its growth into one of the top 10 most visited websites in the world. He's been central to shaping Wikipedia's core principles, including neutrality, civility, and radical transparency, as well as its commitment to allowing anyone to use and edit its content. Widely recognized as a pioneer of the open knowledge movement, he's been named to Time's list of the 100 most influential people and continues to advocate globally for trustworthy information ecosystems. Jimmy's also the author of 7 Rules for Trust, a blueprint for building things that last, distilling lessons from decades of building collaborative digital communities. Jimmy, welcome to Technovation. It's great to speak with you today.
Great, thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
It's my pleasure, certainly. But first, I want to thank our partner, DemoHop. CIOs are under pressure to deliver innovation faster, reduce duplicate work, and clearly demonstrate the impact of what's being built across the organization. But today, innovation happens in pockets. Great work is happening, it just isn't visible beyond the teams doing it. That's why Fortune 100 technology organizations use DemoHop. It's a SOC 2 certified platform that provides a clear portfolio-level view of company-wide innovation, purpose-built for internal demo days, quarterly planning, and virtual tech showcases. DemoHop turns one-off moments into enterprise-wide visibility for everyone, not just leadership. It's how modern CIOs scale innovation, build credibility for their technology organizations, and align execution with strategy. Learn more at demohop.com. That's DEMOHOP.com. And now on to the interview. Well, Jimmy, one of the things that was really fun about reading the book was, as a frequent user of Wikipedia, it was a good reminder of how, in many ways, how unlikely its success seemed at the outset. So many of the ideas behind it, radical and outside of the norm, a lot of people predicting that it could not succeed. I'd love to begin with Wikipedia's genesis, if you don't mind. But before founding it, you explored various ideas around openness, free knowledge, online collaboration. What experiences or frustrations were the catalyst for creating Wikipedia?
Yeah, so before Wikipedia, I had a project called Newpedia, which was the same vision, free encyclopedia written by volunteers. But I didn't really know much about organizing an online community and so on and so forth. And we knew that, and foreshadowing what actually did happen, that there would be questions of trust in terms of trusting the content. You know, it's written by volunteers in this online process. And so our first reaction was actually to not trust anyone. So Newpedia, the predecessor to Wikipedia, there was a 7-stage review process to get anything published. You had to send in fax in, this is how long ago it was, fax in your CV to prove you were qualified to write. And it didn't succeed. It didn't really work at all. After 2 years, we had just under 24 articles completed. And so I tried to make an article, and I realized it was very intimidating. It wasn't fun. And that was when I got the idea of like, okay, look, we have to find a way to make this easier. We have to find a way to make it fun. And that was when I put the wiki online. And yeah, changed everything.
And when you launched it, what problem were you trying to solve that traditional encyclopedias couldn't?
The issue really was, it wasn't so much trying to solve solve a problem exactly, except that because I didn't really know what problems there were, but I was just excited about the technology. I was watching the open source software community come together. So seeing programmers collaborating in new ways. And I realized that kind of collaboration could extend beyond just to software into all kinds of cultural works. And thought, oh, okay, great. Let's try and make an encyclopedia. And obviously, in the internet age, the old process of Britannica, say, while it had great merit in many ways, of course, it was very slow. Things, it took years to update the encyclopedia. And I thought, gee, we could go a lot faster. Like there are a lot of things that could be done differently.
What were your biggest dreams for it? Obviously, it's become this ubiquitous a presence in so many people's lives, a first stop for many in investigating a person or a topic or an idea or a movement, as the case may be. What were your, I find it almost hard to believe you could have conceived of something that would be as ubiquitous as it is today. But what were your dreams for it in those early days?
Well, I mean, I always say I'm a pathological optimist, so I always think everything's going to be great. So I sort of did, but I sort of didn't. It is true. I remember looking at a list of the top 100 websites at the time and seeing an encyclopedia reference type of site at around number 50. And I thought, oh, if we do a really good job, we might make it in the top 100 or who knows, even the top 50. I didn't think of it as something, Wikipedia is now generally viewed as like the fifth most popular website. And obviously the global nature, I had an inkling, as we all had an inkling, that, I mean, the internet's global, why not be in every language and so forth? But to really understand what that meant and to sort of see some of the amazing things, sort of meeting people as I do, and I travel and I meet Wikipedians, and just like, oh, wow, like this young person in Nairobi is very passionate about Wikipedia and is working in their own language. That's amazing. And it's like still, even today, it kind of takes my breath away how comprehensive everything is.
Talk a bit about the Wikipedians themselves. Again, one of the kind of trips down memory lane was how the whole idea that this would be written by volunteers to most people probably seemed very radical and impractical in many ways. Don't you want experts, who are the ones that are writing down the history of or the overview of these various topics, whereas literally anyone with some guardrails, of course, in mind can contribute their knowledge to this. From the get-go, you must have seen or foreseen that is some of the risks associated with it. Talk a bit about that idea of ensuring this was volunteer-led.
Yeah, so I mean, the concept of the volunteer community was really from watching open source software. I mean, you would say, gee, look, software developers make a ton of money. Even back then, it was a good job. Why would people do it for free and create an alternative operating system? But as we know now, Linux is massive and a lot of open source software is massive. And there's a lot of details about how that works and all the participation and the licensing matters and all of that. But I saw, like really nice and really kind people really putting a lot of time and effort into helping other people online, pre-Wikipedia. And, even today in the book, I talk about Reddit, which is some of the best and some of the worst places on the internet are on Reddit. But you will see people just chipping in to help, sort of answer people's questions or help someone think through something and so forth. And so that generosity of spirit, which we do see all around, I thought, you know what, I think people would like this. People would enjoy it. And I do think that's one of the keys to understanding. We had to make it fun. We had to make it interesting. Before the wiki model, people were interested and they were trying, but it wasn't very fun. And so it didn't really catch on. But, people enjoy it because you get to do something intellectual with your spare time. You get to meet other smart people who are interested in the same things you're interested in. We try to have a very friendly community and a very welcoming spirit. I mean, we're human beings, so we sometimes are a bit grumpy and this and that, but we try. And, and I think that's what people are looking for. They like that sort of environment.
And I also, among the lessons from the book that I found really poignant was how validating this was for you in terms of how the vast majority of people are good. You have a cross section of literally the entire Earth that are involved in Wikipedia. Talk a little bit about some of your insights on now having had reason to contemplate this and have some of those early hypotheses validated.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest lessons of it all is, how many people are basically perfectly nice and decent people, which we sort of all get in our normal day-to-day life. You bump into somebody on the street, you probably don't think, yep, they're probably going to stab me. You think, oh, hey, let's have friendly chat in the elevator or whatever it might be. And that's really real. And of course, one of the reasons it feels a little bit surprising is because so much of the internet is so toxic. And there's reasons for that. Some of it is algorithms that promote content to keep people on sites as long as possible, which doesn't always promote the best content. It promotes content that creates engagement, which may be because it upsets people or angers people or starts a sort of ridiculous flame war or whatever it might be. But also, I always remind people when we get too negative about today's internet, I'm like, well, I'm old enough to remember Usenet, which was even older than the World Wide Web. And it was like a giant unmoderated message board. And it was super toxic. I mean, we didn't need algorithms to be mean to each other. Like we can do that anyway, but we can also be great to each other. And that's what I think we should try and encourage.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, how do you, now all these years later, 24, nearly 25 years since its creation, how do you recommend that students, journalists, the general public use Wikipedia thoughtfully? And I wonder, what limitations do you highlight that those who use it ought to be aware of?
Definitely. And I think this is really crucial. I remember years ago hearing a professor say, oh, I tell the kids in my class, don't even look at Wikipedia. And I'm like, yeah, but 100% of them are looking at Wikipedia. Let's be realistic. And instead, we should think about, okay, how do you use Wikipedia? Like, what are the cautions? What are the things you should be careful about? So, you'll often see a Wikipedia entry that says at the top, the neutrality of this article has been disputed, or you'll see the following section doesn't cite any sources. That's great. Like, that's part of our transparency. It's like, oh, we're not so sure about this one. Here it is. It needs some work, but, a warning. You should take that seriously. The other thing is, you should check the talk page and see what are people arguing about. Like, what are the things? I think this is especially a cool technique for journalists is look on the talk, and journalists these days, you're dropped into a situation you know very little about and you're expected to sort of ask intelligent questions. Great. It's a tough job. Obviously, look at Wikipedia, but also look at the talk page and see like if there's a conflict in the sources. Like people are like, some sources say this, some say that. Like, there's your interesting questions. Like, what are the Wikipedians struggling with? That's something that needs clarifying in the world. That's usually a great question. Same for students. I mean, particularly for people who are writing a paper or something like this. I always say, look, the role of an encyclopedia in the research process is really to get you started. Like, go down to the bottom, follow those links, dig deeper. I think especially the older you get. I always say, you know what, if a 13-year-old writes something and puts in a footnote to Wikipedia, at least they made a footnote. Like, that's progress. Like, that's good. But beyond that stage, you really should use Wikipedia as your jumping off point.
At a couple different places in the book, Jimmy, you reference a conversation you had with Harvard Business School's Frances Fry, past interviewee of this podcast, in fact. And she argues that trust arises from a balance of authenticity, empathy, and logic, a model that you show graphically twice in the book itself. You mentioned this insight, and she notes, actually, the breakdown of trust can always be traced to failures in one of those three dimensions. And I wonder, what examples you have. Clearly, it's something that was a particularly important insight in your conversation with her back in 2024 to inform the book. Talk a bit about how that, what examples validate her view in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of them, and I do think it is something when it's a toolkit when you look at a trust problem to say, okay, what went wrong here? What are the things that we could do better in our organization to rebuild the trust that we've lost? I tell the story of Airbnb in the early days, where they basically somebody put their apartment up on Airbnb and somebody stayed in it and they completely trashed the place. And then the company didn't respond with empathy. They didn't really respond well. They had some, I would say, poor advice, saying, don't make any comments, don't take any responsibility, it's going to go away, and so on. It just got worse and worse, as these things tend to. And they really realized, like, oh, actually, we need to really stop everything, and we need to think about trust. Because if people don't trust that they can put their apartment on Airbnb without it getting trashed, like, where are we going to end up? Like, we won't have a business. And they did. And obviously, they made a lot of changes. And now, obviously, it's a massive, huge company, huge success. And people use Airbnb, and there's, it's all fine. But they had to think about it. They had to really say, okay. And in order to do that, they couldn't just look at numbers. Like, if you just looked at the numbers, you would say, you know what, a tiny percentage of people are going to be bad guests. That was true. Tiny percentage of apartments are going to get trashed. Yes, true. But to not have the empathy to think about when that happens, it isn't just about sort of $200,000 in damage and we have to figure out what to do about that. It's actually that person's emotional reaction. Like, she made a blog post saying she was sitting in the stairs crying, almost like sick at her stomach to go back into the apartment. And you're like, wow, like that's really hard. And that's more than just the monetary issue. It's more than just the numbers. It's the empathy that's going to resonate with other customers and other potential, landlords who are going to share their place. And so that was a failure of empathy in that case. And, there's lots of other examples.
Yeah, the fact the rule one of the seven is trust is won and lost person to person. You argue that trust operates at a human scale, even inside a massive system like Wikipedia. How do you preserve person-to-person trust in a global community of anonymous volunteers?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it has to do with having a purpose, rule three, because that enables us to think about the rules, to think about what we're trying to accomplish in a non-chaotic way. Like we all know what we're here for, and if something is standing in the way of that, then we need to examine it. And so building trust between volunteers so you can sort of say, okay, like we're going to disagree, but let's find a compromise, that sort of thing is crucially important. And the methods are very human. It's things like, one of the rules of trust, but one of the core rules of Wikipedia is civility, no personal attacks, is to say like, actually, you have to treat people in a decent way. And that's like massively important. And obviously, we see this in lots of places. And I would say most workplaces are pretty good about this. I mean, people do understand you can't really tolerate a toxic culture of backstabbing and horribleness, but some companies do fall prey to that. I mean, not on purpose. Nobody sets out to say, yeah, I really want to have a toxic company. But if you're not careful about it and you're not thoughtful about it and saying like, okay, what's gone wrong here? Like, why are people sort of all hating each other? Like, how do we fix that? Like, that's super job one.
Yeah, another of the rules, rule four, trust in the power of reciprocity. If you want trust, give trust. Yeah. Wikipedia famously starts with an assumption of good faith. You just brought up the powerful example of Airbnb and the necessity of having some safeguards in place, but giving trust abundantly, and then having those safeguards for the outlier cases that will exist. Talk a bit about your own philosophy from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, so with Wikipedia, like one of the things about it is like it's really open. Like anybody can come and join, anybody can start editing. 99+% of pages aren't protected in any way. You don't even have to log in to edit. It's kind of an amazing and ridiculous thing, and yet it works. But it also it works in part because it's so vulnerable, deliberately vulnerable. Like people want to live up to that, and I actually do think that's really important. And we all understand that in our personal lives. Like certainly, if you're in, if you have a friend who you literally don't trust to leave alone in your house for 5 minutes, you think that's wrong. Like there's a real problem there. And like what kind of people do you like to be around? You like to be around people who are trusting and who aren't watching every penny when you go out to dinner together and things like that. It's just like, yeah, let's be decent people. And people respond really well to that. Actually, I have teenagers, and I think one of the struggles of parenting is as teenagers, they want to grow, they want to be more independent, but they are also children still. And I think one of the things you have to do is give a little trust. Say, I'm going to trust you, but I recommend be like really transparent about it, really open about it, really talk about it, to say, look, okay, you've asked to do this thing. I'm not feeling super comfortable about it, but you know what? I'm going to trust you, but I really want you to live up to that trust. I want you to show me that you deserve this. They do. They actually do. Like they respond really well to that, whereas they respond really poorly to a low trust environment, because then the only choice they've got left is to rebel, and then you get into a quarrel and all of that, and you can go down a bad spiral. And so I just think this idea of like, okay, like I'm going to extend some trust to you, and I hope you'll extend it back. Yeah, it works. It's really practical.
Yeah. Rule 6, is you have a mission, stick to it. Don't take side in others' disputes. And Wikipedia's neutrality policy is strict. And I wonder, talk a bit about that. You tell the story of or the hypothetical story of a desire to be able to have a priest and a Planned Parenthood advocate being able to have some common ground, have a respectful debate, understand they come from very different perspectives, but they are well intended with great intentions in each side. Talk a bit about your philosophy from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really core to how Wikipedia works. And whenever we lose sight of that, it's a problem. And, like it's really the best way is to sort of say, look, we're not necessarily going to agree on whatever the issue might be, but we can probably find a compromise. We can also agree to describe our conflict in a fair way. And that's really, the Planned Parenthood and Catholic priest example is to say, look, the priest is going to realize like Wikipedia is never going to say abortion is a sin. And yet they can say, but we can describe the conflict. We can say, well, the Catholic Church position on abortion is thus and such, and these arguments have been put forward, and critics have responded thus. I'm starting to sound like a Wikipedia entry. And that is really valuable. And it turns out that oftentimes people who are quite ideological are actually pretty good at this because they know their own position well enough that they feel a bit of intellectual confidence that if only you explain it fairly, people will end up tending to agree with you or tending to appreciate the argument. It's people who aren't so sure that they're on firm ground who tend to be more angry and to more aggressive. And, this is one of the things you see a lot on more political parts of social media is people just lashing out in really angry ways. And you're like, if you really were so confident that you're right, you probably wouldn't, behave this way. You would just calmly explain what's going on. And well, of course, there's a lot of problems with the algorithm and the way social media is designed that don't really facilitate that kind of thoughtful interaction. But it's what we all want, really. I mean, I think most people are like, I would rather have a conversation with somebody thoughtful and interesting who I disagree with than have a screaming match. Like screaming matches are never fun.
I wanted to also ask you about the last of the seven rules. Transparency builds trust, especially when you have something to hide. I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah.
Wikipedia, of course, offers transparency from edit histories to policy debates. You just highlighted that there a moment ago. Talk a bit about the whole notion of, especially when you have something to hide. That's when transparency is needed most. Build on that if you would.
Yeah, I mean, it's in terms of building trust. If you're just completely transparent about things you're obviously happy about and you're going to say anyway, then that doesn't actually build trust. But if you're able to say, you know what, and I think of this in kind of in a company context, it's like, you know what, actually, we screwed this one up. Like we didn't, like the product we put out wasn't as good as we hoped it would be, and we need to do better. Like that goes a long way with customers. That like you've got let's say a business to business situation. You've got to deliver on a contract, and the due date is 2 weeks from now, and you realize, yeah, we're not going to make it, right? So you can either try and rush through some shoddy work and deliver something that's not good enough, and you're going to lose trust, and you can stonewall and pretend, and so that, or you can just be like really open and honest and say, you know what, actually, we're not going to hit this deadline, and we need to, we need to work with you on this. Here's what happened. Here's how we screwed up. Here's stuff that was beyond our control. People will just say like, you know what? I like working with these people. Like they're proper people. It's all good. Now, obviously, hopefully the other side is also being trustworthy and so forth, because we all know like, that plans don't always work out the way we thought and so on and so forth. That being adaptable, being so on, it requires an atmosphere of trust. Another way of thinking about that or looking at it is, in a workplace where the employees don't feel trusted to talk about here's something that's not going right internally, and you're only supposed to tell your boss, only the good news, don't tell any bad news. You end up in a really dark place. There's actually the Chernobyl movie miniseries. It's really all about that. It's like everybody in that context was terrified to tell anybody higher up that anything was wrong, and things just got worse and worse and worse and worse. They didn't feel safe. They didn't feel trusted. Whereas if you had a different environment where it's like, actually, there's a huge problem here. We need to talk about it now before it gets even worse. And the other side saying, okay, great. I'm glad you told me. Like now let's figure out the problem. And then in the future, we're going to figure out how to stop it from happening again. So it's kind of obvious stuff. Like, it's easy if I sit here and chat about it, but it's actually really hard in those cases. Like, even when you have something to hide, the whole point is that's the moment when you need to dig deep and say, you know what, we've got to be transparent here, even though they're not going to be happy to hear this, but we've got to tell them.
You mentioned earlier, Jimmy, your belief in open software and making something that was ultimately free for use. What do you think would have been lost if Wikipedia had been created as a for-profit enterprise rather than a free public good?
I mean, it's a really good question. And, I'm not always convinced that for-profit versus non-profit is actually the key dividing line, because I see great for-profit companies that are ethical, and that's all great. I think in our case, though, there is something about the business model, such as it is. It's a terrible business model, but that we don't have ads, for example, that we don't sell data. All of these sort of easy and obvious ways we could make money would be very, very tempting if we were a for-profit. And they would also lead to other things, like the incentives of the organization would be different. If we had an advertising business model, we would actually care how long you spend on the site. We would want you there as long as possible. We would sort of think about algorithms to promote content to keep you clicking as long as possible. We might say internally even, you know what, actually, this page is really biased, but it's making people really mad out on social media and they're clicking through to read it, and we're getting a lot of ad revenue. Maybe a few provocative pages isn't such a bad thing. Whereas we actually think, yeah, actually, page being biased and people yelling at us, that's really bad. We need to look at that. We need to fix it. And so that's, I think it would change the incentives in lots of ways, and that would be problematic. But, early in my career, I would get journalists asking me kind of leading questions, thinking I must be some kind of communist or something who hates money and profit. Do you think it's wrong that Google makes money? I'm like, it's great. Google makes money. That's fantastic. Run a good business. There's nothing wrong with that. It isn't right for everything, though. And I think for Wikipedia, being like a public park or a library or a school, there's something quite nice about, like, our mission is just the thing. The mission is not sort of also to make Jimmy rich. So,
one of the pillars that you've defined for the company is that Wikipedia has no firm rules. And the idea of no firm rules is, I think fairly radical for a platform the scale of Wikipedia's. How do you think about maintaining flexibility and creativity while still protecting the project from what to the to at least at first blush might appear as fostering chaos?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the keys there, and yeah, it's a clever little twist of a rule, because it's kind of paradoxical and puzzling to people, but it also gets people thinking about what does that really mean. And what it really means is, like, the point of Wikipedia is the mission, a free, high quality, neutral encyclopedia. And if the rules are getting in the way of doing that, then those rules aren't up to speed. And that's really important. And, it's also a lot of little things like, you can imagine having really strict rules about footnotes. They have to be in a certain format, like most publications would have. And basically, somebody who puts in a footnote and doesn't quite do it right would get in trouble and get yelled at. It's like, no, that's not a firm rule. Like, yeah, we do have a preferred format, but if you're really obsessed about footnote formats, then you should go around and format footnotes and don't yell at people about it, right? It's actually, it's completely fine. It's like somebody came in, they added something that was true. They put in a reference. Yeah, they didn't format it the way we like. That's okay. So it's that kind of thing. But also, it is hard to maintain flexibility, because when you've been doing something for a long time and you've got sort of well-received and sort of things are working and so on, and then you start to realize, or people start to realize, like, actually, some of this isn't quite working as well as it should, but how do we fix it? Well, we've always done it that way. That's a trap for any organization. Why do we do it this way? Well, that's the way it's done. That's the way we've always done it. Of course, we know loads and loads of companies that have really failed to dynamically change, because that isn't the way we do things here. That isn't the IBM way, for example. Nearly killed IBM at one point. I mean, they've managed to get through it, but they managed to get through it by sort of changing their mind, and that's really important.
You mentioned earlier discussions with teachers who would say to you, we've banned people from using Wikipedia, and you mentioned, well, everyone is going to be using it anyway. You also talked about the necessity, of course, of being mindful of sources and so on. all of that could be replaced with generative AI as the topic, as opposed to Wikipedia. And I wonder, what is your experience with some of the initial blowback, your very important points of guidance earlier in this conversation and in other contexts as well, of course. How does that have you feeling about the emergence of generative AI and some of the similar, if not the same, of course, some of the similar notes of precaution that are necessary there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of parallels. And, I even, as I say, I've got teens and, they hear from things from some teachers at school, like, don't use AI, don't use ChatGPT. And I'm like, 100% of them are going to use ChatGPT. So actually, what should we be doing? We should be saying, okay, look, teach them how to use it. Teach them why are you saying not to use it? What's wrong? Why, like, what are the mistakes it makes? How does it hallucinate? How do you check a hallucination? How do you use it for the thing it's good for? Like brainstorming is quite good at brainstorming, I've found. But you can't count on it for facts because it makes stuff up and it gets things completely wrong. Also, that it gets things completely wrong in very plausible ways is actually one of the more interesting things that people do need to understand. It's like, well, I asked it a question, it gave me a great answer. It's like, okay, why do you think it's great? Well, it sounded right. Okay, well, that is that really this test for truth? No, it isn't. And that it sounded right is actually a bigger problem than sounding crazy, because at least if it was just completely crazy, you would go, hold on a minute. So I think we've got to teach young people and each other, us adults, and actually it's one of the things we often say things like teach young people, but then you'll see studies, about misinformation and sort of viral things that older people in my age group are more likely to be tricked by fake content on social media than young people. They've grown up realizing it's full of a bunch of nonsense, right? So yeah, let's not just teach the young people, let's remind ourselves.
Yeah. I wonder if you have a thought on how collaborative knowledge platforms should distinguish between human-generated contributions and AI-generated content without stifling innovation. How do you feel about that balance as somebody who obviously has a very human layer to how content is created?
So we're really big believers in human in the loop, but we also recognize like this is an amazing technology. The large language models, they're pretty incredible, and yet they can't be trusted. And so wholesale inclusion of content, like we sort of would say, we're not planning any features where the content that you see as a reader doesn't go through a human first, because that's really, really important. At the same time, we don't want to just absolutely ban the use of AI by our volunteers. They need to be careful. We need to think about how to use it. But I mean, in no small part because there's no way to tell. Like you can sort of guess sometimes something's AI generated, but that's really imperfect. But also a lot of people are using it as an intermediate step. One of the things that we are really excited about, I'm really excited about, is the improvement of machine translation using AI. And that ability for people, a lot of people who are editing Wikipedia are trying to edit Wikipedia in a language that is not their mother tongue. And they may feel a little lack of confidence, and they may actually find it very useful to say, okay, I wrote this in English, but I know my English is not perfect. It doesn't always sound right. Ask a large language model and it will give you tips, and they won't be perfect, but they'll be pretty good. And that's a great use. And we should encourage that kind of thing. So, there's a lot. And I'm interested in exploring ways that large language models could be helpful in making suggestions to the community. Here's an article. Oh, this article is missing the following 4 facts, which I found in French Wikipedia, but they should be in English Wikipedia too. And just that's interesting. As a volunteer who's like, oh, I want to do some work on Wikipedia today. What should I work on? Oh, here's a note left by a robot that says, hey, this is something interesting. You might want to look at it. Now, if a robot's boring and wrong a lot and all that, people will just go, yeah, that's not useful. But if it's useful, I think that's interesting. I think we should, do some experimentation.
Elon Musk has repeatedly criticized Wikipedia of late, and he's in fact launching a competitive platform, Grokpedia, as an alternative. He also suggested defunding Wikipedia, which led, ironically, to, if I read correctly, millions of dollars in new donations. You must have appreciated that. I wonder, what does this episode sort of what conclusions are you drawing from the lessons of this?
Well, I mean, well, there's a few. I mean, first of all, Grokpedia, I haven't had time to do a deep analysis because I'm out talking about the book all the time at the moment. But, the early reports are exactly what you would expect. Large language models, they hallucinate, they sort of get themselves tied in a knot, and, the quality of the content's not there. But it's an interesting experiment. That's fine. I think people should experiment. Certainly when he says Wikipedia is Wokepedia and gone like super left wing, okay, no, it hasn't. Like the community, I know them. They're a bunch of nerds, not particularly political and so on and so forth. But again, I think that's a case where we have to say, okay, hold on. Let's grapple with this critique. Like, are there instances where Wikipedia is biased? Are there areas where we should take a deeper look at our processes and so on? Absolutely, yes. I think that's always something you have to grapple with. And, again, it's one of these human instincts. If you get attacked, you can become defensive. But the difference between a mean-spirited attack that just hurts and doesn't feel nice, and then you get defensive, and a genuine, thoughtful critique is blurrier distinction than we sometimes think. And so it's like, oh, is there a kernel here? Even though it's being delivered in a way that's not really fair and so on, are there things we could do better? And I think, yeah, actually we should grapple with that. So that's the kind of thing is like, be transparent even when you've got something to hide. It is that. Not that we have much to hide here, but just to say like, hold on, like if people think that a certain article is biased, we should take that seriously and check and grapple with it.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, I mean, it should be noted, Jimmy, there have been critiques on the right and the left, which perhaps in some ways may be a good thing. That depending on people's lenses, they may have a view that something they're reading is wrong in the opposite direction as well. It's not as though it's always coming from one direction.
That's right. But also they can both be right, because Wikipedia is a big old beast, and so I think, but yeah, broadly. I think everybody will understand, and I think anybody who's working in journalism and the media will understand there's always going to be a criticism, and there's always going to be some of it that you could go, we could probably do better. And some of it you're like, well, you're a crackpot and can't really help you on that, so you just got to be thoughtful.
If you were starting Wikipedia today as opposed to 25 years ago, is there anything you would do differently? And I don't mean that necessarily in terms of mistakes that have been made and learned from, but also just with the advancement of technology between then and now.
Yeah, it's a good question, but I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, clearly, some of what we do today using technology, even just like basic web technology of how the editor works and things like that, we couldn't have done back then. But that doesn't really count as something to do differently. It would be done differently, but that's not actually that interesting. And this is where I do go back to being a pathological optimist. So I always think everything's fine. And I do know, it's sort of like when mistakes were made, we learned from them. And I don't know how I would have not made that mistake. I mean, in some sense, you could say, well, look, all the technology, including the wiki, to create Wikipedia existed 2 years earlier, at least. So I could have gotten started 2 years earlier. But then again, I'm like, yeah, but how would I have done that? How could I have, because I had to do Newpedia to know why that wouldn't work. So yeah, it's hard to say, but yeah.
How involved are you today? How involved are you in Wikipedia on a day-to-day basis nowadays?
I'm very active, very involved. So I'm leading a neutral point of view working group where we're really looking into the question of neutrality. What are the things we could do to strengthen neutrality, to sort of reiterate to the public that we have a passionate commitment to neutrality? I am active on the board and in the community and so forth, but I don't work at the Wikimedia Foundation. I never have. I'm a volunteer. So I sort of have this funny special role in the community, and yeah, it's my life's work, really. I'm very passionate about it.
And how else are you spending your time professionally these days? In addition, of course, to telling people about the book that you've read. You've written, excuse me.
Yeah. So the book is taking a lot of my time right now. I also have a pilot project called Trust Cafe at trustcafe.io, which is an effort to create a new type of social network where content and people are promoted based on how much they're trusted by the rest of the community. It's small. People can come and check it out. I haven't been promoting it much because we're still working on the software and thinking about the algorithms and all that. But it's my side hobby and I love it. And I love playing with that. I'm looking forward to, I think in January, I'm going to have like a week to set aside to actually dig deep and brainstorm with the team. What else am I doing? Well, I'm on the board of Fandom. So Fandom's doing very well. This is the for-profit wiki company. It's entertainment, gaming, wikis, and yeah, it's great and keeping us very busy. I don't know. I'm always doing something, but I'm very fortunate to have accidentally become successful because I would make a terrible employee, and I recognize that. So I just get up every day and do whatever seems interesting.
If I read correctly on your Wikipedia page, among other places, Jimmy, you were pursuing a PhD in finance. Is that right?
Yeah.
What was your goal in that originally? Obviously, your career took a turn in a different direction, presumably, unless you've leveraged that in a way that you've not described. What were your goals originally as you were going through your academic wanderings?
Yeah, I mean, just to tell a little bit of the history, I'm not sure about goals exactly. I was very young, but I had gotten an undergraduate degree in finance at Auburn University. And one of my professors was very keen that I should go into a PhD program in graduate school. And he moved to the University of Alabama. So I kind of followed him and went to the University of Alabama to be in the PhD program there. As I was progressing through it, I realized that while Alabama was a regionally strong university, and it is good business school, it wasn't the platform to get the top jobs in finance, to be a professor at a top school. So then I went to Indiana University and was working on a PhD there, got very disillusioned with academia and the way that all worked. I didn't find it very fun. And then I paused. I'm like, well, hold on. Why did I go into all this? Why did I go into the PhD in the first place? And I realized, well, when I got my undergraduate degree, I really had a dream of going to work for Goldman Sachs or something in New York. But it wasn't really, like, you had to come from a top business school to even get an interview. Back then, that's probably still true today. I don't pay attention to it. But and so I thought, okay, I'll need a higher degree. And then the opportunity came across to become a trader. And I was like, that's probably what I wanted to do in the first place. And I'm really fed up with the PhD program. So I left and I became a futures and options trader in Chicago, which I really enjoyed. Did mathematical quant stuff, and I had a great time doing that. But again, I was very excited about the growth of the internet, and I was really excited about the opportunities there. And I remember because I'm such a geek, I was working on a web browser just as a hobby on the side, sort of after work and weekends. I would be programming on my web browser when Netscape went public, and Netscape was worth $4.3 billion, if I remember correctly, on day one. And I looked at my browser and I looked at Netscape 1.0 and I was like, my browser is not as good as Netscape 1.0, but it is not $4.3 billion worse. And that was a moment, actually, that was probably the kickoff in many ways of the dot-com boom, was the Netscape IPO. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but it was a moment. And I thought, wow, the market is really saying, like, the internet is a big thing. And I actually would like to do something on the internet. And so that was when I started moving my mental efforts and my work towards the internet and sort of starting little projects and things like that, which I imagine there's somebody out there like me right now who is sort of whatever they're doing, they're suddenly seeing large language models and generative AI, and they're going, you know what, actually, that looks super interesting. I'd like to be involved in that. And who knows what's going to come of that? Hopefully something good.
Mm. We've talked about numerous lessons and anecdotes from the book itself. What have you recently read or watched or listened to, as the case may be, that you'd recommend to others, Jimmy? Anything immediately come to mind?
There's a book. So I talk in my book, I talk about an organization called Braver Angels, and what they do is they bring people together from different ideological perspectives in an in-person meeting, facilitating conversations, and they've had really great success in helping sort of find common ground and so on and so forth. And it's really a lot of manual work and so on, but it's a great organization. I find it really interesting. And Monica Guzman, who's affiliated with them, wrote a book called, what is it called? Monica Guzman, something like, I never thought of it that way. And the idea is like how to have hard conversations in these divided times. And she's really, focused on, she opens with a story about family visit and so forth. And I just think that book has been really good. I'm not finished it yet, but I met her because we did an event together, and I'm like, she's super cool, and this book is great. So that's one. And then the other things, I'm watching Stranger Things. So I would say no spoilers, but last night I caught up on the most recent episode, watching it with my teenagers. So it's great.
That's fantastic. Well, your book, again, is 7 Rules for Trust, a blueprint for building things that last. You certainly built something that has lasted, Jimmy. Congratulations on your success. And thank you so much for spending a little time with me and by extension with my audience. I'm very grateful for it.
Fantastic. Yep. Happy to be here.